Hi, I'm Lisa Fletcher, and you're in The Stream. Children of divorced parents are twice as likely to drop out of high school than their peers and less likely to go to college. Is it time to rethink how we're approaching the social and legal aspects of divorce? Plus, how divorce has impacted not only a generation's view on marriage and relationships, but on society. And later, what's a beta marriage? Surprising alternatives to tying the knot that millennials would be willing to try. My digital producer and co-host Wajahat Ali is here. He's bringing in all of your feedback, and we do have a ton of it. You know, it's interesting. We've been throwing around these statistics a lot, and then we kind of took a informal poll with our team, and our team is right in line with kind of that 55-ish%.
Actually, more than 50. You know, the reliable statistic is about 50%, 55%. For our team, it's about 65%.
Oh, wow.
And you and me, we're the oddballs in our team. Our parents have stayed together, good relationships, but for many of our teammates, they said sometimes divorce was actually better for them. And our community member, Cooper, actually echoes that sentiment. He goes, my parents divorced. I vote that parents not stay together for, quote, sake of the kids. Unhappy parents are very stressful on kids. And Lisa, we've had personal stories come through Twitter, Google+, video comments, Facebooks, and I'll be sharing them throughout the show.
Great. Well, divorce obviously is never easy on the kids, but could it have a longer and more serious impact than previously thought? It's an issue the all-new Al Jazeera America documentary series Edge of 18 tackles with different students that it features.
My parents, you know, basically hated each other, and my mom was having an affair. I would ignore her completely.
You know, you can't just get over something that sort of scarred you so much.
With divorce on the rise since 2009 after a 40-year low, is it time to confront these impacts on kids in a more serious manner? Joining us in studio is Randy Kessler. He's been a divorce attorney for more than 25 years and is the former chair of the family law section of the American Bar Association. He's also the author of Divorce: Protect Yourself, Your Kids, and Your Future. Also joining us, Mariana San joins us from Philadelphia. She is the student that you just saw featured in our documentary, Edge of 18. Since graduating high school, she is now a student at Temple University. And Julia Lewis joins us from San Francisco. She is a psychologist and the co-author of the book, The Unexpected Legacy of Divorce. Thanks to all of you for being here. So, Julia, you did a groundbreaking 25-year study on the children of divorce, and we all very reflexively say divorce is tough on kids. But are we paying enough attention to how tough it is and the long-term impacts?
Probably not. Even though there have been several studies, ours being one of them, showing clearly that divorce is really difficult on both parents and kids when it happens and then over the years following divorce. I don't think there has been enough social and legal attention paid to the long-term effects, and we're seeing it now in terms of a whole generation of people who are wary of marriage and wary of having kids.
Julia just mentioned the legal effects. Randy, this is something that you've immersed yourself in for the last 25 years. What do you see from your perspective? Is there a lot of nuanced effect going on behind the scenes that most people aren't aware of?
There is, and I don't think lawyers pay enough attention to how to protect the kids from the long-term benefits. Thank goodness for Julia and Dr. Judy Wallerstein, who wrote these books about what happens to children 20 or 30 years later. As lawyers, as divorce lawyers, people always say, the kids are resilient. You know, I've got to focus on me, I've got to focus on my new spouse or my new partner or my new boyfriend. And you're not just divorcing your spouse, you're divorcing the children. I mean, a judge once put it to me like this. You know, when you get divorced, you are destroying a child's empire. And when you get remarried, you're installing a new emperor. You know, and children are really weak and vulnerable, and we just overlook that.
Well, you know, there's a new term, ACOD, Lisa. I had no idea what it was. ACOD, Adult Children of Divorce, a new acronym. And we have a lot of ACODs who tweeted in a lot of personal stories. Michelle Vroom says, when your parents divorce, you experience grief. Grief over the loss of the family unit. She continues, when your parents divorce, it destroys your foundation and forces you to question your identity. And Stephanie says, as a child, I felt like I had to choose whose side I was on. If I went with dad an extra day, mom would be mad, ... And Mariana, talking about the effect divorce has on children, you know, there was talking about identity, family unit, relationship. I mean, you are a child whose mother was not part of her life. Tell us about the effect that has had on you growing up.
Yes, it has affected me a lot in many different ways because, I don't really have someone to go talk to about, regular teenage things that mothers and daughters would talk about. And also, it affects me as a person because I've had my mom absent from my life for more than 5 years. So there are times where, I would feel alone, or I would keep things to myself, or where I would have to grow up a little faster and be the mother figure for my younger siblings.
Julia, does divorce impact things like a child's earning potential, their educational potential? Have you seen anything like that in your studies?
Oh, definitely, definitely. Children from divorced families, as you said in your intro, are less likely to succeed educationally. Their emotional difficulties make it harder for them to get through high school, and the lack of financial resources caused by the divorce makes it less likely for them to be supported going on to college, or even if they're in college, getting through college. And that obviously affects their earning potential, for sure.
Mariana, have you felt that? It's your first year in college. Talk a little bit about what that has been like for you.
I think that what happened with my parents sort of motivated me to be successful and to try harder so I don't have the same fate as my parents, and so I can, build a family soon and to be able to support them, unlike my parents did for me. So I think that it motivated me more than anything else.
Well, we're talking about when parents divorce, the standard is what's in the best interest of the child, Lisa. So we asked our community, should that still be the standard for custody? Julie was shocked we even asked the question. She says, no, they should turn children of divorce into garden mulch. Rabia, however, she says she's gone through a divorce, and she says, yes, this standard should always control. And AKN Nola Wanderer says, perhaps courts, etc., would have a better idea of, quote, best interest if they considered opinions of kids, now adults, who experienced it. And AKN Nola Wanderer actually has a good point. Should we take into consideration the child's views, opinions, thoughts more when it comes to the custody battle, or should it be more to the third party as it is right now, Randall?
Well, there's a balance. First of all, if you have a mature child, and it depends on the age and the maturity of the child, yes, of course. Second of all, you don't want to involve the child too much such that the child feels like they were responsible for the ultimate outcome. I mean, you want that to be something that is not on the child's back. You want that to be a judge decision. But even raising children in an intact family, a happy husband, happy wife, is hard, making sure children come out okay and do good in the world. And we're all human. When we're going through a divorce, everyone naturally focuses on me. What can I do to make sure that I'm okay coming out of this? And you got to make that time when you're going through a divorce to say, me second, child first. And that's just a hard thing to do. And as lawyers, as judges, as part of the system, it's something we've got to emphasize. But children should be considered, and their rights, their preferences should absolutely be considered by judges, by guardians, by psychologists that are involved.
Julia, Randy mentioned something. A lot of the adults are like, what's best for me? And a little earlier in the show, he said, how am I going to manage my new relationship, my new spouse, my new this, my new this? I feel like we've created this culture of divorce where parents, adults, have so many more freedoms now than they've ever had because divorce is so widely accepted. But what does that translate to for the kids?
It translates for the kids is that the kids' needs, even though we have a thing called best interest of the child, it really doesn't work out that way. There's, as Randy pointed out, there's very little acknowledgement of children's legal and financial needs. And at the time of divorce, parents are understandably totally subsumed in their own emotional turmoil. And it's even harder for them at that point in time to concentrate on their children and on what might be the best interests of their children. So they might think that they're doing what's best for their children, but mostly, in the majority of cases, they're fighting for what they want themselves and assuming that the kids, that's in the best interest of the child. The other thing I might just throw out there is that decisions made at the time of the divorce with regard to custody, visitation, might be okay for children at that point in time, but they're very rarely revisited, and children grow and they develop and their needs change. And oftentimes children find themselves imprisoned practically in a set of visitation and custody agreements that no longer fit who they are or what they need.
Julie, you know what's interesting is that mom has a lawyer, dad has a lawyer. The children don't have a lawyer. Sometimes they have a guardian looking out for their best interest, but they can't say, this is what I want. They don't really have a voice. It's my lawyer, her lawyer, and you hope that the lawyers will do right by the children. I mean, children get lost, and they do grow up, and they do change, and their needs change. Who's there to monitor and look at what's best for the children? They don't have their own lawyers.
And the guilt that Waj mentioned in one of those tweets, where if I pick dad for an extra day or mom for this, the other's going to be upset with me. So they're trying to navigate these very complex emotions, I would think.
You know, we sort of have a saying now amongst divorce lawyers that we try to figure out custody and visitation for a 16-year-old, and it's sort of, there's nothing you can do. A 16-year-old's going to do what they want to do, and you just say, okay, and you try to make it best and easy for them. Because if they want to spend the night at mom's house, how are you going to stop a 16-year-old? You just try to make it best and try to make sure it works out. And that's probably the result of not having good planning when they were 3 or 4 or 6, like Julie was talking about.
Well, Randy, we actually asked our community, how can parents going through divorce actually help their children deal with what is an often very difficult situation? Jorge says, never get a divorce. Show what love and working a relationship is about. Sometimes people need to fight to stay married. Some people, Jorge. But Kizra says, don't have loud fights. Make it a quick and a clean break. Don't trash the other in front of the kids, and make the visits easy. And
read Julia's book and Dr. Wallerstein's book that talks about how children carry these burdens for 20, 30, 40 years, not just 6 months.
Mariana, it brings up an interesting question that some kids actually feel better when their parents separate because it reduces that tension and that constant stress in the household. How was it for you?
Exactly. I think that after the divorce, it was a lot easier for myself and my siblings because we didn't have to hear the constant arguing and the constant fighting. So once they separated, you know, we got to get some peace, and I decided to stay with my dad. And I feel like, you know, I'm better now than when my parents were together.
You know, I hate to be smiling when Mariana says that, but I hear so many times from clients, they say, well, we just want to wait and wait and wait for the kid's sake. And when I told my child I was getting a divorce, the child said, what took you so long? I mean, children know that it's coming well ahead of the parents, and parents think they're doing a favor by not telling the children and not breaking up. But sometimes have a frank discussion with your child. I don't know if Mariana agrees with that, but I see that a lot.
Yeah, I agree with you. I knew about a year before that something like that was going to happen, and it was a bit of a relief for it to finally happen, and all the drama, I think, just made everything better once it happened.
Julia, in preparation for the show, I was reading a study that was a bit surprising to me. It was young adults, older young adults, college age, who had been in a family that had been divorced for at least 3 years. And more than 3/4 of them had said, my life would be different and I would be different if my parents had not gotten divorced. And they expressed extreme grief even into adulthood, 18, 19, 20, 21 years old. Waj mentioned adult children of divorce. Talk a little bit about the impacts on kids that are older that I think a lot of us would sort of assume, oh, they're grown up, they're past this.
Yes, well, in many ways, I think divorce impacts older children more because they have more understanding of what's going on and what they're losing. You know, when your parents divorce when you're 3, most of your life is spent in that post-divorce family. But if your parents divorce when you're 16, most of your life is spent with your parents together. And it does have a very different effect. And, you know, I think Mariana has a good point. For some kids, it's an actual relief because they've lived through a lot of overt trauma. And, in fact, for many kids, they're involved in their parents' conflicts. So I think for families like this, it's actually a relief when the decision is made and the household is broken up. But for other kids, this is a surprise. They know that the parents are not getting along, but basically they are not involved in the parents' problems. And in fact, in many families where the parents don't get along, the child is really the bright spot for both of the parents in the midst of a troubled marriage. So a lot of this depends on how the kids react, depends on what the dynamics were in the family leading up to the divorce.
Well, up next, we're going to talk about how divorce impacts children's perceptions of marriage and relationships and the impacts on society as a whole. And if you want to send us your story, keep tweeting us at AJMStream or join the conversation using the hashtag AJMStream. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're discussing the impacts of divorce on kids, buoyed by a groundbreaking 25-year study by one of our guests, Julia Lewis, who discovered the long-term effects can be significant and life-changing. Julia, in the 1960s, marriage was the norm for young Americans, and now it seems to kind of be the exception. Is American marriage dying?
No, American marriage is not dying. I think a lot of people are way more tuned in to the effects of divorce, and they might be warier of marriage, and they might be more cautious, and they might be thinking of alternative models of commitment and recommitment. But I think marriage itself is alive and well.
Randy, do you think people are thinking in terms of marriages these days rather than the singular?
It's interesting that you ask that. I see a lot more divorces when it's their second marriage, their third marriage, their fourth marriage. And, you know, sometimes we have the template already set to go, and we're going to just fill in the new name of the new husband. And I think also prenups have had a lot to do with that. The fact that people will sort of figure out how they're going to get divorced so that they don't go through the mess they did the last time around. So awareness is not a bad thing. Awareness of divorce and the possibility of divorce makes people think, do I really want to get into this if it might end? And if I do get into it, how do I want to conduct myself if and when that day comes? So the fact that we're all aware of divorce is a good thing, I think.
Well, we talked to the ACODs, Adult Children of Divorce, and asked them how has divorce changed their perception of relationships and marriage. Saadat says it's harder to maintain a healthy relationship and to consider marriage. If resilient, might have a positive result in my own life. Stephanie says, I used to be against and scared of marriage and said I am never going to do it. But now I'm with a man who I love and I want to marry. Fantastic. And we have a video comment from Michelle.
My name is Michelle Vroom. When I was 24, my parents got divorced and I had just gotten married. I was very scared that I had made the wrong decision and that I would end up divorced like my parents. It was really hard to be happy as a newlywed, knowing that my parents' own marriage was falling apart.
Julia, we talk about a lot of abstract numbers, and these numbers actually have faces on them. They mean something to individuals. But what does it mean to society as a whole?
Well, I think that it's harder for... So what we're seeing is a couple of things. We're seeing children of divorce, now young adults. They're understandably wary about marriage, and they're very wary about having children, because what they'll tell you is, I don't intend to divorce, and I don't want a divorce in my marriage, but I particularly don't want to have kids and have my kids go through a divorce. Mm-hmm. So we're seeing children of divorce delay marriage, and once they're married, they're delaying having kids, which I think is a wise move. But what we're also seeing, interestingly, is you asked me earlier about the impact of divorce on children's, young adults' identity. We're seeing kids growing up very insecure about themselves, about going into relationships, about being able to have a committed relationship. And so, surprisingly, we see children of divorce actually leaping into marriage earlier when they do marry. We all know that the earlier you get married, the less likelihood it is that that marriage is going to last. Yeah. So,
I mean, I used to see clients would come to me 20 years ago and say, I'm so ashamed to be here. No one in my family has ever gotten divorced. They would always say, I'm the first one. I really don't want to do this.
Boy, has that changed.
And it's the exact opposite now. They say, well, I should have known because my parents, my grandparents have... There's been a world shift in this, at least from my perspective.
Well, we had another story. This is from our own newsroom. This is Tima. She goes, my parents divorced when I was 3, but they reconciled when I was an adult. It made me more determined to be more selective. She has been married 2 years now. So there you go. There's some hope. And then we also asked, are you a child of divorce? Do you think children need married parents in their lives to be happy? Alima says, absolutely. Randy, you deal with these parents all the time. You deal with the children. Do you think right now what you're looking at, children need married parents to emerge and stay happy?
I think they need happy parents. And sometimes, you know, divorce is not a good thing, but the truth of the matter is divorce is just the process of the breakup. You know, if parents are not getting along and they're taking out their anger and their frustrations in front of the children, do it separately. I mean, I see post-divorce people that get along so much better divorced than they did married, and children that come out happier. It takes a lot to do that because you need two that are okay with it. Usually somebody didn't want the divorce and somebody did. But once you have that maturity to get through the divorce and figure out children come first, they're going to always come first, you know, there are some minor benefits to divorce. There are 2 Christmas celebrations. There are 2 sets of families giving birthday presents. So if you can look on the bright side, if you handle it correctly, better than a bad marriage can be a good divorce.
Mariana, if the statistics are correct, you know half of the friends that you have are products of divorced families. Your grandparents got divorced. Your parents got divorced. Do you notice anything in your personal life and your personal relationships that would indicate that there's sort of a cycle, a proclivity to divorce if it's in your family?
I think so. In a lot of the cases, well, I'm Cambodian, and my parents and my grandparents got together when they were very young, you know, for financial reasons and everything like that. So I do think that they rushed into marriage for stability and to be able to live in America as well. And that affected their marriage and everything because it was sort of forced on them.
Still ahead, the marriage rate is at an all-time low, and some millennials think it's time for some more options like a beta marriage. We're going to tell you what that's all about next. Welcome back. We're discussing shifting perceptions of marriage in the millennial generation. And Randy, last month, a team of researchers in conjunction with USA Network surveyed 1,000 millennials on theoretical alternatives to marriage and things that they might consider. Talk a little bit about some of the results of that.
Well, you know, it's interesting to think about. And they did these studies. What kind of marriage would you like? A presidential marriage where every 4 years you get to think about it and maybe re-up for 4 more years? And I think the one that won out, the one that the majority said they wanted to do, was the beta marriage, the 2-year marriage. And it's really not really viable because you can't have a temporary marriage. You're either in or you're not. What happens if you say, we'll be married for 2 years and then it goes away? Well, is the child that you had legitimate? Is the child not a child of the marriage? Do you have to sign a prenup every 2 years? I mean, it just doesn't really make sense.
We asked our community about this beta marriage. Beck says it defeats the point of marriage. If you're not sure, maybe you're not ready. It's like legalizing friends with benefits. Derek says, technically, 50% of marriages are trial periods. And NSA says that would be a great idea. Most marriages fail in first year, if not the second. Mariana, you are our resident millennial. Beta marriages, good idea, bad idea?
I kind of think bad idea because I'm more traditional. I feel like if I'm going to get into it, I want it to be for the long run. But I get why, you know, some people would choose to have a beta marriage.
Julia, to me it feels like there's a fundamental fear of commitment going on here among that generation with these numbers so high.
Yeah, I think they're understandably quite wary. And I agree with what Randy said. The thing I like about the results of that study, I think that actually having a 4-year or a 2-year re-up contract is problematic. But what I like about it is the idea that you review your marriage at specified time periods. You don't just let it drift along and build up unhappiness or build up resentment. There's an idea about that you look at it very closely after 2 years or 4 years, and it may not be a in or out kind of thing, but it really would force people to probably have more communication and put in more effort.
And so we asked our community, beta marriages, does it mean that people are more flexible or non-committal? JT says flexible versus non-committal is just 2 sides of the same coin. Depends on who you ask. Randy, we'll give you the final word. Flexible or non-committal?
I'm going to vacillate on that one.
Because you're an attorney?
Right. It's non-committal. But the bottom line is, look, I'm a divorce lawyer. I've got every reason to be skeptical about marriage, and I'm a romantic, and I say do it. Jump all in, none of this hesitating. If you want to do it, do it. And better to have loved and lost than to never have loved at all.
And on that note, I want to thank all of our guests for joining us today. Randy Kessler, Julia Lewis, and Mariana San. The issue of divorce is just one of many featured in the documentary series Edge of 18. Don't miss it. It is right here on Al Jazeera America. It's coming up Sunday at 9 p.m. Eastern. Waj and I have already seen it. It is fantastic. For more, you can also log on to our website at aljazeera.com/ajamstream.